This is a story about a couple by the name of Mark and Tatiana and the Anaya family, comprised of Gus and his wife Olivia and their daughter Maria. In 2004, Maria introduced Mark and Tatiana to her parents, Gus and Olivia, and suggested they lend them money for a residential remodel flip in Cheviot Hills, California. Maria project managed the entire remodel. The whole project went many months longer than expected, but in the end, after the completion of the remodel and subsequent sale of the property, Mark and Tatiana received back a balloon payment comprised of their principal and their agreed-upon interest. Between 2015 and 2016, Mark and Tatiana lent the Anayas small amounts of money, roughly between $10,000 and $40,000 at a time, to help finance 4 small real estate flips in the Las Vegas, Nevada area, as well as one in North Hollywood, California. Maria would initially present each project to Mark and Tatiana. She would be the main point of contact and would coordinate the money transfers into the Anayas bank account, which was under the name of United Home Buyers of America, or UHBA. In January 2017, Maria emailed Mark and Tatiana regarding an upcoming real estate auction for a property located at 12566 Rose Avenue in West Los Angeles, California. Maria had encouraged Mark and Tatiana to work with her and her parents to help with financing the purchase and remodeling of this property. All 5 people attended the auction together. There were approximately 30 or so different parties bidding against each other. The opening bid started at $1 million, and in the end, they won with a bid of $1,095,000. Mark and Tatiana, via the business entity Prima Impresa LLC, provided a $25,000 cashier's check to secure the winning bid. An appraisal performed 2 weeks later showed an approximate value of $1,140,000. Within the week of winning the auction, Mark and Tatiana provided an additional $84,500 in a cashier's check to satisfy the auction requirements of 10% down payment. For the Anayas part, they were going to get a mortgage to finance the remainder of the purchase, as well as getting a construction loan to finance most of the future remodel. In mid-February 2017, Mark and Tatiana repeatedly requested that the Anayas provide a real written agreement between them, but even though they said they were going to, they never did. Around this time, the Anayas stressed that if they did not secure a mortgage, then Mark and Tatiana's $109,500 10% down payment would be forfeited, lost. This put Mark and Tatiana under financial duress, as they had no control of anything. Not only did the Anayas have no money in the project, but 100% of Mark and Tatiana's $109,500 was in a very risky position if the Anayas didn't get a mortgage. Mark and Tatiana realized that they had to play nice with these people who suddenly acted with aggression. On February 17, 2017, Gus and Olivia emailed to Mark and Tatiana a remodeling plan that was prepared by Maria that outlined a second-story addition and a first-floor remodel for this property. This plan had an initial and estimated total project cost of $527,310 that was separated into various expenses, such as a $273,750 down payment, $18,858 in escrow fees, $31,500 in closing costs, $80,000 in startup costs, and a monthly loan payment total for an entire year that was a whopping $123,202. This was more than what Mark and Tatiana had available to fund, so they started working with the Anayas to figure out a version of the remodel that would be less expensive, since the Anayas refused to put any of their own money into the project. On February 27, 2017, the Anayas emailed Mark and Tatiana an estimate escrow closing statement that outlined the eventual primary lender's loan details. The loan would be for $1,330,000, which was comprised of a $930,000 primary loan and an additional $400,000 construction holdback for remodeling expenses. The primary lender ended up being Trillion Capital Fund LLC, which carried an $11,083.20 per month holding cost for a 12-month term. Trillion Capital lent the Anayas this money for the exact same first-floor remodel and small second-story addition renovation plan that was presented to Mark and Tatiana. Nothing else. Between February 23rd and March 2nd, 2017, there were several emails and text messages that went back and forth to revise the remodel expense towards the same remodeling plan of renovating the existing first floor and to add a small second story. Eventually, on March 2nd, it was agreed that for this project, Mark and Tatiana would loan the Anayas $424,928 with a 20% yearly interest for a total repayment of $509,913.60 on or before March 2nd, 2018. If paid back after March 2nd, then the interest rate would increase to 25% per year. For their part, the Anayas would manage the remodeling, put it up for sale, and repay Mark and Tatiana on or before March 2nd, 2018. The financing terms would be finalized with a note and deed of trust. In addition, the use of dedicated funds solely for this Rose Avenue property was also outlined. The total that the Anayas would borrow was comprised of the previously invested $109,500 plus an additional $102,428.04 that Mark and Tatiana would send to escrow, plus an additional $212,999.96 that was sent directly to the Anayas. Of that money, the Anayas were supposed to set aside $132,999.96 solely for the automatic monthly Trillion Capital loan servicing. However, they didn't do that. Instead, they used those funds to fund other projects that Mark and Tatiana were not aware of. In fact, on the same day the Anayas received those funds, they only had $474.03 in their combined UHBA bank accounts. This clearly demonstrated that they were not adequately capitalized at the time that they were entrusted with Mark and Tatiana's investment funds. On July 13, 2017, after 4 months with little communication from the Anayas, Gus presented Mark and Tatiana with a completely new and shocking direction for the house and project. He demanded the house be torn down and be built as new construction. This would increase the scope of the project from the original 2,626 square foot remodel to around a 3,150 square foot new construction, which would extend the completion date by roughly a year and cost an outstanding $900,000 versus $400,000, and they refused to put any of their own money into the project. This was forcefully presented to Mark and Tatiana as the only option the Anayas would be taking, and demanded that Mark and Tatiana contribute an additional $275,000 to refinance the first position loan with Trillion Capital. This was extortion. Mark and Tatiana said they would not be able to provide any additional funding beyond what they originally agreed upon. Mark and Tatiana suggested they go back to the original plan or go along with the forced upon new construction plan if the Anayas contributed their own money or found other lenders to provide them with enough funding to finance their massive $900,000 build. The Anayas refused and instead threatened to force the home into foreclosure, and along with it any remaining equity that would have gone to Mark and Tatiana. During the next few weeks, the Anayas only and constantly made it Mark and Tatiana's responsibility to give them more money to preserve the project and the money that Mark and Tatiana had already loaned. The Anayas were literally holding Mark and Tatiana's investment hostage unless they provided them more money. These threats became very stressful for Mark and Tatiana. At this point, Mark and Tatiana were desperate and under extreme financial duress. The Anayas presented only three terrible options for Mark and Tatiana. The first, to loan an additional $275,000 to them so they could build their large new construction project. The second, to give them $50,000 and forego any money that the Anayas owed them, and the Anayas would let Mark and Tatiana take over the dilapidated property that had a massive defaulted Trillian loan. And the third, watch as the Anayas let the property go into foreclosure, resulting in Mark and Tatiana losing all of their money, while the Anayas walked away with roughly $200,000 of their money. Obviously, none of these options were good for Mark and Tatiana. At this point, due to the extortion they were under, they started to investigate these people they thought they knew for over 2 decades. They performed a simple internet search for Gus and Olivia, and it revealed extremely depressing and shocking discoveries. There were countless lawsuits, court documents, internet news, television news clips, radio interviews about how these two had defrauded people, many of them already in financial despair. They took advantage of people. They were greedy, thoughtless, and morally bankrupt. They had operated under various business names and in various types of businesses throughout the years. They lost a $2.3 million lawsuit against Nissan, whom he owned a Las Vegas car dealership from at one point. They operated fraudulent mortgage lending and loan modification companies, cases that were spearheaded by the state attorney generals of both Arizona and Nevada. Most recently, a default judgment for around $400,000 was filed against Gus in June of 2016. All these nefarious activities prompted Mark and Tatiana to do further research. They contacted Trillian Capital, the main lender in first position on this home, and discovered not only did the Anayas unnecessarily draw $40,000 from the construction holdback that had nothing to do with the remodel at all, it increased the loan from $930,000 to $970,000, but that they also stopped paying the mortgage after the first 4 months, and they were weeks away from a notice of default to be filed with the county. The Anayas attempted to find a lender or financier to go along with their massive new construction vision, but they were unsuccessful. In the attempts to obtain financing, the Anayas had an appraisal performed on October 27, 2017. It showed a potential increase in value from $1,140,000 to $1,280,000. This would represent an 18% increase since its initial purchase 7 months prior without a single thing performed on the property. Unfortunately, the first position loan with Trillian Capital had also drastically increased from $930,000 to $1,068,333. Even if the Anayas could sell it for the appraised $1,280,000, the cost would result in nothing left to pay back Mark and Tatiana their $510,000 note. With the Anayas not providing any reasonable alternative to pay back Mark and Tatiana's loan, Mark and Tatiana begged to avoid foreclosure by taking over the property to try to remodel it and sell it on their own, just if all of the mortgage arrears and closing costs came from the money that UHBA held onto and didn't spend on the project, as well as return any remaining funds to Mark and Tatiana. The Anayas refused and continued to threaten to let the property go into foreclosure and lose all of Mark and Tatiana's money unless they gave them even more money. As time was running out for Mark and Tatiana, the Anayas eventually relented and allowed Mark and Tatiana to avoid foreclosure, but only under terrible conditions for them. Mark and Tatiana were forced to take over the property with very limited equity left in it, and the Anayas would not pay for any of the closing costs and not give back any of the roughly $250,000 that they had stolen from the project. Mark and Tatiana struggled to find a lender willing to both pay off the existing Trillion loan and provide enough capital for them to complete a modest remodel of the existing home so they can sell it to recoup some of the money that the Anayas had stolen from them. They eventually found a lender who would loan them funds above the value of the home, much like the original $400,000 construction loan the Anayas received above their main $930,000 loan. Mark and Tatiana were loaned $1,240,000, which paid off the Anayas $1,068,333 Trillion loan and $53,027 in closing costs, for a total of $1,121,360. Using the $1,280,000, that only equaled approximately $158,000 in equity, a far cry from the $510,000 that Mark and Tatiana were expecting just weeks away.